Welcome back. Well, the Amnesty International report also calls on the global community to do more to end the suffering caused by 40 years of occupation. Among its recommendations is the deployment of an international human rights protection force throughout Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. Amnesty also calls for the international community to investigate and prosecute those responsible for war crimes or other crimes under international law. It also asks countries that provide humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians not to use emergency assistance as a political bargaining tool. This recommendation is aimed squarely at the US and the European Union. Well, let's rejoin our guests now. From Amman, Hassan Khatib, former Palestinian minister, now a political analyst. From Jerusalem, Klein is the bureau chief for the online news service WorldNetDaily. And from London, Donatella Rivera, a researcher on Israel and Palestine for Amnesty International. Hassan Khatib in Amman, let me start with you before we talk about the international community. I mean, how bad are things on the ground for ordinary Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza?
It's very bad. West Bank has been completely separated from Gaza. The West Bank has been fragmented into 6-7 cantons where movement is extremely difficult between one another. According to the last World Bank report, these Israeli restrictions on movement of persons and cargo are the primary cause for the economic deterioration and for the precedent increase in the unemployment and poverty in both West Bank and Gaza.
Klein in Jerusalem, presumably if Israel doesn't recognize that it's in breach of any human rights, it therefore wouldn't agree perhaps to any human rights monitors being deployed in the occupied territories.
Oh, you mean like the human rights monitors or the international forces in Lebanon that are allowing Hezbollah to rearm, to regroup openly in front of it? But if I could just respond to your guest before, he said, I had to laugh when he talked about the violence of the Jewish settlers against the Palestinians. I don't know what violence he's referring to. I didn't know that Jews were shooting at Palestinians on the road, whereas Palestinians are shooting at Jews. Or that Jews were infiltrating Palestinian communities and attacking the families or sending Jewish suicide bombers into Palestinian territory. So I'm not really sure what violence the settlers are carrying out against the Palestinians. I just had to laugh at that.
OK, well, let's bring in back Donatella Rivera in London for a minute. I mean, you recommend that human rights monitors under international law be deployed, but they tried that, didn't they, as Klein was saying, in Hebron some 13 years ago, and it never worked because they had no powers of intervention. So how do you see it working now?
Well, the temporary international presence in Hebron is still there, and as well as, and that's obviously it's an intergovernmental force. It's still there. It's monitoring the situation. There are also other NGO sort of voluntary types of monitors, and you know, however limited the contribution people may think it has been, it has certainly contributed to lowering the tension. And certainly what we have seen that in areas where international monitors are present, even if they are informal international monitor, it has contributed to lowering the tensions between the Palestinian communities and the Israeli settlers. I mean, I think that Klein sort of, in a way, trivialized the situation of the problems of the relation between the Palestinian communities and the settlers. It must be recognized that Palestinian gunmen, Palestinian armed groups have indeed attacked and killed Israeli settlers, and that is entirely condemnable, because even though Israeli settlers are there unlawfully, that does not mean that they're legitimate targets. So it is absolutely illegitimate and to be condemned, those attacks. Similarly, there have been numerous attacks by Israeli settlers on not Palestinian gunmen, but on ordinary Palestinian
All right, well, I mean, I can see Aaron Klein shaking his head there. A quick response from you, Aaron Klein.
I'm sorry, but I can't see how she can possibly compare the Palestinians who almost every day Fatah, Al-Aqsa brigades shoot at the Israeli settlers, attempt to infiltrate their communities, to the Jews. There's no such comparison. When have the Jews ever carried out acts of violence against the Palestinians? It's absurd.
Aaron Klein, let me ask you quickly.
Aaron Klein,
sorry, let me ask you quickly. I mean, what's going to happen to the 50,000 Palestinians who will end up on the Israeli side of the separation wall? I mean, will Israel just knock down their houses and kick them out? What happens to them?
Actually, one thing that we haven't talked about is what is going to happen to the Jewish property, like in Calandia in northern Jerusalem and a lot of parts of eastern Jerusalem, where Palestinians have squandered there illegally. We talk about Palestinian territory, the West Bank constantly being Palestinian territory, but even the United Nations doesn't call it Palestinian territory. It calls it occupied or disputed territory. I don't know what is going to happen to those 50,000 Palestinians, but I can tell you that there have been numerous cases where the Israeli Supreme Court stopped the fence from being built upon Palestinian land because it was cutting through their property. Israel regularly abides by the international standards and by the standards of its own Supreme Court.
Okay, I want to just move away from the issue of the separation wall and bring in back Hassan Khatib in Amman, because if Fatah and Hamas, the two Palestinian factions, can't agree on a peace deal amongst themselves, clearly this is a major stumbling block for the international community to engage in the peace process, yes?
Well, no, because I think that although the Fatah and Hamas are having disputes and fighting on many things, they nevertheless agree. Like 75% of the Palestinians, according to public opinion polls, on a solution based on the exchange of land for peace, ending the occupation according to the borders of 1967, and solving the refugees problem in accordance with the international legality. A majority of the Palestinians, including Fatah and Hamas, are agreeing that this can be a final end of claims and a final peace arrangements between Israel and the Palestinians. So the Palestinian internal disputes, which are very unfortunate and has negative consequences, but it's not the reason for the delay in the progress of the peace process, because we had previously a Fatah government that was very conducive to peace, but there was an Israeli rejectionist government led by Eric Sharon, who was completely unwilling to deal with the Palestinians politically. But can you allow me to give an answer to your Israeli guest who said, who asked whether there has been any Palestinian violence against settlers? I want to remind him only of Baruch Goldstein, an Israeli terrorist settler who opened fire and killed 30 Palestinian prayers inside a mosque. And in order to have other examples, he can go to the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, because they list thousands of incidents in which Israeli settlers were sources of violence and killing to Palestinians in nearby villages.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Hassan Khatib in Amman, Aaron Klein in Jerusalem, and Donatella Rivera in London, thank you all so much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of the programme. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team here, goodbye for now.